Jake Morrison stood in the center of the massive crystal chamber and felt very small. The walls rose high above him like frozen lightning, glowing with soft blue light that hurt his eyes. Around him sat the most powerful beings in the galaxy, each one looking down at the human delegation with what could only be called amusement. The Veltar delegates clicked their mandibles in rhythm, creating a sound like chittering laughter. Their black insect bodies gleamed under the chamber lights, and their compound eyes reflected Jake's image 1,000 times over. To his left, the Etherean representatives floated in their containment suits, their gaseous forms shifting colors from purple to green as they communicated through harmonic vibrations that sounded like mocking music. High Chancellor Zexthara leaned forward on her throne, made of what looked like living metal. Her blade-like arms clicked against the armrests as she studied the documents that floated in holographic displays before her. Jake had spent 3 months preparing those documents, detailing Earth's military capabilities and requesting admission to the Galactic Federation's military alliance. "So," Zexthara said, her voice like grinding metal through the translation device, "the humans wish to join our warrior caste." The chamber filled with more chittering and harmonic sounds that Jake was beginning to recognize as laughter. "Captain." Lisa Bennett stood rigid beside Jake, her military uniform crisp despite the long journey to Nexus Prime. Her jaw was tight as she watched the alien delegates pass around holographic images of human soldiers and weapons. Each image seemed to cause more amusement among the assembled beings. "Your species fights with what you call firearms," rumbled Gorthic the Chromic, his stone-like body barely fitting in his designated space. "Metal projectiles fired by chemical reactions. How delightfully primitive." The Veltar military advisor, General Crixbox, activated a display showing human soldiers in combat gear. "Look at them," he clicked. "They wear fabric and ceramic plates for protection. Our lowest ranked warriors have personal energy shields that could deflect their most powerful weapons." Commander Ryan Price kept his face neutral, but Jake could see the man's hands clenched behind his back. They had all known this would be difficult, but the casual dismissal was worse than anyone had expected. "Perhaps you could explain?" Zexthara continued. "What advantage soft-skinned mammals could possibly offer to an alliance that includes species who have conquered entire star systems?" She gestured with one blade arm toward the Chromic delegation. "Gorthic's people can survive in the vacuum of space, and their natural armor stops plasma bolts. The Veltar have been bred for warfare over 10,000 years, with reflexes faster than your primitive projectiles." Jake cleared his throat and stepped forward. "Honored Chancellor, Earth has survived countless wars and conflicts. We have experience in adapting to new threats and working with limited resources. Our soldiers are trained to think creatively and overcome obstacles through ingenuity rather than just superior firepower." The laughter that followed was even louder than before. The Etherean's harmonic vibrations became so intense that the crystal walls began to resonate, creating an eerie singing sound that made Jake's teeth ache. "Ingenuity," Zexthara repeated, as if the word tasted bad. "You mean you have learned to fight better than others who are weaker than you." She activated another display showing comparative data. "Your species has an average lifespan of less than 100 years. The shortest-lived member of this council has seen 3,000 years of warfare. What could you possibly teach us about conflict that we have not already mastered?" Lisa Bennett stepped forward, her voice steady despite the obvious hostility. "Our record speaks for itself. Humanity has survived ice ages, plagues, and global wars. We adapt, we overcome, and we never give up." General Crixbox made a sound that the translator rendered as scoffing. "You survived conflicts against your own species. That is like a child bragging about winning fights in a nursery. A galaxy contains threats that would exterminate your entire planet before you could fire a single shot. The holographic displays changed to show various alien weapon systems. Plasma cannons that could melt through mountain ranges, energy shields that could stop nuclear explosions, and warriors genetically enhanced to move faster than human eyes could track. This is what real warfare looks like, Gorthic rumbled. Your chemical-propelled projectiles and primitive explosives would be useless against enemies who have mastered the fundamental forces of the universe. Jake felt his heart sinking as the council reviewed Earth's application. The voting was quick and unanimous. Red symbols appeared beside each delegate's name, indicating rejection. Zexthara rose from her throne, her insect body towering over. The human delegation. The Galactic Federation appreciates Earth's interest in joining our military alliance, she said with mock formality, but we must decline. However, we are prepared to offer your species status as a resource contributor. Your planet appears suitable for agricultural production and mineral extraction. The insult was clear. Earth would become a farm world, providing food and raw materials for the real members of the Federation, while being protected like livestock. Perhaps, Zexthara added, as the human delegation prepared to leave. In a few thousand years, when your species evolves past throwing rocks at your enemies, we might reconsider your application. The chamber erupted in laughter. Once again the crystal doors sealed behind the departing humans. Jake Morrison walked through the corridors of Nexus Prime, knowing that Earth had just been humiliated in front of the entire galaxy. None of them could have imagined that, within months, those same aliens would be begging for human help. The emergency transmission reached Earth Defense Command at 0347 hours. 6 months after the humiliation at Nexus Prime, General Patricia Wells stood in the Situation Room, watching the holographic display that showed 12 red zones where Federation worlds had simply vanished. Not destroyed, not conquered, completely consumed, leaving nothing but empty space where star systems used to be. The Devourers came from beyond the galactic rim, the Veltar messenger explained through the communication array. His usual arrogance was gone, replaced by something that sounded like fear. They are machines, but not like any artificial intelligence we have encountered. They learn from every battle, adapting their technology to counter whatever weapons we use against them. Admiral Helen Carter leaned forward, studying the tactical data. You're saying they ate 12 entire solar systems? Consumed, the alien corrected. They break down matter at the molecular level and incorporate it into their fleet. Every ship they destroy, every weapon they analyze, makes them stronger. Our plasma weapons worked for exactly one engagement before they developed immunity. Wells felt a cold chill as she processed the implications. The same aliens who had mocked human weapons as primitive were now admitting their advanced technology was useless. The request came 3 days later. High Chancellor Zexthara herself appeared on the communication screen, her insect features showing what humans were learning to recognize as desperation. Earth Defense Command, she began, her usual condescending tone replaced by urgent formality. The Galactic Federation requests immediate military assistance. We are prepared to offer humanity a trial membership in our defense alliance. Major Kevin Brooks couldn't help but smile grimly as he listened to the details. Kepler 442b, an agricultural world on the outer rim, needed defense against Devourer scouts. The Federation was offering Earth a chance to prove itself worthy of joining their military ranks. They're throwing us the scraps, Lieutenant Colonel Sandra White observed after the transmission ended. A single planet with minimal strategic value, probably already written off as a loss. Maybe, Wells replied, but it's our chance to show what human soldiers can do. Brooks, I want you to take 300 Marines to Kepler 442b. Work with the Veltar forces already there. But remember, they're expecting us to handle logistics while they do the real fighting. The journey to Kepler 442b took 2 weeks aboard. The transport ship Liberty Bell. Brooks used the time to drill his Marines on the intelligence reports about Devourer capabilities. The enemy scouts were small, fast, and deadly, mechanical entities, about the size of armored vehicles that could analyze and counter most conventional weapons within hours of first contact. Captain Danny Foster studied the tactical briefings with growing concern. Sir, if these things adapt to energy weapons that quickly, our standard plasma rifles might be useless after the first engagement. Then we don't use standard tactics, Brooks replied. Pack extra ammunition for the kinetic weapons, chemical explosives, projectile firearms, anything that doesn't rely on energy systems they can easily analyze. When they arrived at Kepler 442b, the human delegation was met by Commander Vex Kaler of the Veltar Expedition Force. The insect warrior's attitude made it clear that he considered the humans barely above civilians in terms of military capability. Your forces will establish supply lines and evacuation routes, Vex Kaler informed them through his translator. The Veltar will handle direct combat operations. Try not to interfere with actual military procedures. Brooks nodded politely while his Marines unloaded equipment that must have looked like museum pieces to the aliens. M4 carbines, fragmentation grenades, improvised explosive devices, and even some old-fashioned bolt-action rifles that had been specially requested by Sergeant Amy Rodriguez. You brought antiques, observed Sub-Commander Trixville, watching human soldiers check their weapons. Those chemical-propelled projectiles will barely scratch Devourer armor. We'll see, Brooks replied quietly. The first Devourer scouts appeared. 3 days later, sleek, angular machines that moved like deadly insects across the planet's surface, their sensors constantly scanning and analyzing everything they encountered. The Veltar forces engaged them immediately with coordinated plasma strikes and energy weapon barrages. For the first few hours, the alien tactics worked perfectly. Devourer scouts were destroyed faster than they could advance, their armor failing. Against the concentrated energy attacks, Brooks watched from the command post as the Veltar warriors celebrated what appeared to be an easy victory. Then the second wave arrived, and everything changed. The new Devourer units moved differently, their armor plates shifting and adapting in real time. Plasma bolts that had been devastating just hours before now scattered harmlessly across their surfaces. Energy weapons that had cut through the first scouts like paper now barely left scorch marks. Impossible, Vex Kaler clicked in distress, as his forces found themselves facing enemies that seemed immune to every weapon in their arsenal. They adapted too quickly. No intelligence system should be able to modify physical armor that fast. By the end of the second day, the Veltar were in full retreat. Their energy shields, designed to stop plasma and laser attacks, provided no protection against the Devourer's own adapted energy weapons. Sub-Commander Trixval was the last to fall, his perfect genetic enhancements useless against machines that had learned to predict every possible move a Veltar warrior might make. Evacuation is the only option, Vex Kaler announced as his surviving forces pulled back to orbital positions. The planet is lost. We will bombard from space to deny the Devourers any resources they might have gained. Not yet, Brooks said quietly. My Marines are still down there. Your logistics personnel cannot possibly survive what destroyed our finest warriors. The alien commander replied with something that might have been sympathy. Accept the loss and preserve what forces you can. As the Veltar ships moved to higher orbit, Brooks opened a communication channel to his ground forces. Captain Danny Foster's voice came through the static, calm and professional, despite the desperate situation. Sir, we've got incoming Devourers on all sides. Estimated 300 units converging on our position. The Veltar weapons they left behind are completely useless. These things have adapted to everything. then use what they haven't seen. Brooks ordered, "Remember your training, Marines. These machines think they know how warfare works. Show them they're wrong." What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for centuries to come. Human soldiers who had been dismissed as primitive began fighting in ways that the Devourer intelligence simply could not predict or counter. Sergeant Amy Rodriguez crouched behind the twisted wreckage of a farming machine and watched the Devourer units advance across the field. The mechanical entities moved with perfect coordination, their sensors sweeping methodically for any sign of the human defenders. Their armor gleamed with the same energy-resistant plating that had made the Veltar weapons useless. "Contact in 30 seconds, whispered Corporal Jake Peterson through the communication headset. His position was 200 meters to her left, hidden in what remained of a grain silo. "I count 12 units, moving in standard search pattern." Rodriguez smiled grimly and checked her weapon one more time. Not the advanced plasma rifle that Command had originally issued, but an old M4 carbine loaded with armor-piercing rounds. Primitive by galactic standards. But the Devourers had never encountered projectile weapons that relied on simple kinetic energy rather than complex energy systems. "Remember the plan," she whispered into her communicator. "These things adapt to whatever they see, so we make sure they don't understand what they're seeing until it's too late." A first Devourer reached the designated kill zone, its sensors probing the area where Rodriguez lay hidden. The machine paused, processing data, trying to understand why its instruments detected human presence, but could not locate the exact position. Its adaptive algorithms had been programmed to counter energy signatures and electromagnetic weapons, not humans buried under mud and farming debris. Rodriguez held her breath as the mechanical scout passed within 5 meters of her position. Its sensors swept over her hiding spot without triggering any recognition protocols. The Devourers were looking for soldiers who fought like the Veltar, standing in open formation, using energy weapons with distinct signatures. "Now," Rodriguez whispered, Lieutenant Bobby Jenkins triggered the first improvised explosive device from his position near the old mining facility. The explosion wasn't sophisticated plasma or energy-based destruction that the Devourers could analyze and counter. It was simply chemical compounds creating pressure waves and shrapnel, the same basic principles humans had been using for centuries. The blast caught 3 Devourer units completely by surprise. Their adaptive armor, designed to disperse energy attacks, proved useless against chunks of metal moving at high velocity. 2 machines were destroyed instantly, while the third staggered, its sensors trying to process this unexpected form of attack. Before the surviving Devourers could adapt, Rodriguez opened fire with her M4. The armor-piercing rounds punched through their plating with satisfying metallic impacts. The machines had never encountered weapons that relied purely on mass and velocity rather than energy discharge. "What are they using?" came Vexcaler's voice through the orbital communication link. The Veltar commander was monitoring the battle from his retreating ship, watching in amazement as human soldiers accomplished what his advanced warriors could not. "Chemical explosives and kinetic projectiles," Major Kevin Brooks replied from the tactical command post. "The Devourers can adapt to energy weapons because they understand the physics, but they can't easily counter simple momentum and chemical reactions." Staff Sergeant Tony Clark emerged from his concealed position and fired a rocket-propelled grenade at the largest Devourer unit. The explosion sent the machine tumbling across the field, its adaptive systems struggling to process an attack that seemed to violate everything it had learned about galactic warfare. The real breakthrough came when the Devourers tried to counterattack. Their own weapons had been adapted from captured Veltar technology, sophisticated energy beams and plasma projectors. But the human soldiers weren't where the machines expected them to be. Major Sharon Davis had deployed her forces using tactics that made no sense to mechanical logic. Instead of establishing defensive positions with overlapping fields of fire, the humans were scattered in seemingly random patterns. Some were hidden underground in hastily dug tunnels. Others were camouflaged in trees and ruined buildings. "They're fighting irrationally," Vexcaler observed, his tone confused. "Their positions have tactical weaknesses that any competent enemy could exploit." "That's the point," Brooks explained. "The Devourers expect optimal tactics, because that's how every other species fights. But humans learned warfare against other humans who are unpredictable and emotional. We know how to fight dirty." Corporal Sarah Mitchell demonstrated this perfectly when a Devourer unit cornered her squad in an abandoned farmhouse. Instead of engaging in direct combat, she triggered a controlled collapse of the building's roof. The mechanical scout found itself buried under tons of rubble, while Mitchell's team escaped through a tunnel they had dug as soon as they took position. The Devourer's adaptive algorithms went into overdrive, trying to process these new tactics. For every successful countermeasure they developed, the humans changed their approach. When the machines learned to detect buried explosives, the soldiers switched to remote-triggered devices. When they adapted to kinetic weapons, humans began using chemical attacks that corroded their armor. Communications. Specialist Rachel Green was pinned down in what had been the planet's main communications hub when she made the decision that would define the entire engagement. 3 Devourer units had her surrounded, their weapons charging for a coordinated strike that would eliminate her position. Instead of trying to escape or fight back, Green activated her emergency beacon and transmitted a message to the orbital forces. Grid coordinates 127.3 by 45.7. Fire everything you have on my position. Repeat, fire on my position. Negative, came the immediate response from the Veltar ship. You will be destroyed along with the enemy targets. That's the idea, Green replied calmly. There's a Devourer production facility beneath this position. Take it out. Vexcaler's mandibles clicked in distress. No warrior sacrifices themselves for strategic advantage. This violates every principle of civilized warfare. Rachel, get out of there, Brooks ordered through the communication link. That's a direct order. Sorry, sir, Green replied. Sometimes the best tactical decision is the one that doesn't make sense to the enemy. Fire those orbital weapons before these things figure out what we're planning. The bombardment came down like artificial lightning, plasma bolts and kinetic projectiles from the Veltar ship striking Green's position with enough force to create a small crater. The 3 Devourer units were vaporized instantly, along with a hidden production facility they had been guarding. But what shocked the orbiting aliens was the data that followed. Green had managed to upload a complete scan of the Devourer manufacturing process before the bombardment hit. Her sacrifice had provided intelligence that revealed exactly how the machines were adapting so quickly to new threats. She stayed to complete the mission, Brooks said quietly as he studied the transmitted data. That facility was producing adaptive algorithms and distributing them to every Devourer unit on the planet. Now we know where to hit them. The battle for Kepler 442b continued for 3 more days, but the pattern was established. Human soldiers fought with a combination of primitive weapons and tactics that the Devourers simply could not process. They used terrain in ways that violated military doctrine, employed weapons that seemed inefficient by galactic standards, and made tactical decisions that appeared to be based on emotion rather than logic. Most importantly, they were willing to accept casualties that other species would consider unacceptable. When Lieutenant Colonel Sandra White's squad was trapped in an industrial complex, they didn't retreat. Instead, they used themselves as bait to lure Devourer units into a kill zone where Corporal Lisa Adams had rigged the entire building with explosives. by the end of the week. The surviving Devourer units were retreating from Kepler 442b. Their adaptive systems had been overwhelmed by tactics that seemed to change based on human creativity rather than military logic. Every time they learned to counter one approach, the humans would try something completely different. Vexcalers. Ship moved back into low orbit as the last of the mechanical invaders fled the system. The Veltar commander found himself staring at casualty reports that made no sense by his species standards. The humans had lost nearly 30% of their force, yet they considered the mission a complete success. Your soldiers fought with honor, he transmitted to Brooks, his usual condescension replaced by something approaching respect. But their losses were severe. How do you justify such casualties for a single agricultural world? Brooks looked up at the sky where he could just make out the lights of the alien ships. Because somebody has to draw the line somewhere. And humans are good at holding lines, no matter what the cost. Colonel Gary Thompson stood before the Galactic Military Council in the same crystal chamber where humanity had been humiliated months earlier. This time, however, the atmosphere was completely different. The alien delegates leaned forward in their seats, hanging on every word as he explained the human tactical doctrine that had somehow defeated the unstoppable Devourers. Asymmetric warfare, Thompson repeated, watching as the translation devices struggled with concepts that had no equivalent in most alien languages. It means fighting in ways that your enemy doesn't expect or understand. You use your strengths against their weaknesses, even if those strengths seem inferior by conventional standards. High Chancellor Zexthara's compound eyes reflected the holographic displays showing the Battle of Kepler 442b. Your soldiers used weapons that our analysis indicated were primitive and ineffective. How did chemical explosives succeed where plasma weapons failed? Because the Devourers expected energy weapons, Thompson explained. Their adaptive systems were designed to counter the types of warfare that every other species uses. But humans developed our tactics fighting against other humans who are unpredictable and emotional. We learned to be unpredictable too. General Krixvox clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. You accepted casualty rates that would be considered catastrophic by any military standard. 30% losses for a single engagement. How do you maintain unit cohesion with such devastating attrition? Thompson paused, choosing his words carefully. Because we understand that some things are worth dying for. Each human soldier knows that their sacrifice might save others. We call it acceptable losses, but it's really about being willing to pay the price for victory. The council chamber fell silent as the implications sank in. These aliens had spent thousands of years perfecting warfare through superior technology and enhanced biology. The concept of deliberately accepting massive casualties to achieve strategic objectives was completely foreign to their military thinking. Admiral Helen Carter arrived at Nexus Prime 3 days later with the Earth Defense Fleet. The human ships looked crude compared to the sleek vessels of other species, angular, heavily armored craft that seemed designed more for durability than elegance. But after Kepler 442b, no one was dismissing human engineering. Your vessels appear to prioritize damage resistance over firepower, observed Fleet Admiral Yuthgara of the Etherian Naval Forces. This seems inefficient for offensive operations. Carter smiled as she watched her ships take position alongside the alien fleet. Human ships are designed to keep fighting even when they're half destroyed. We learned a long time ago that battles aren't won by whoever has the biggest guns, but by whoever can stay in the fight longest. The truth of her words became apparent at the Battle of Zarian 7. The Devourer fleet that emerged from hyperspace was massive. Hundreds of ships that had been built from the consumed matter of 12 star systems. Their hulls gleamed with adaptive armor that had learned to counter every weapon the galaxy could deploy against them. The Federation forces met them in traditional formation, Veltar dreadnoughts providing heavy firepower, while Chromak fortress ships served as mobile defense platforms. The initial engagement followed conventional tactical doctrine, with energy weapons and plasma cannons creating brilliant displays of destruction against the star field. For the first hour, it seemed like the Allied forces might actually win. The Devourers hadn't yet adapted to the coordinated multi-species attack, and their losses mounted steadily. Then their adaptive systems engaged, and everything changed. Captain Roger Mills watched from the bridge of his destroyer as the alien dreadnoughts found their weapons becoming useless. Plasma bolts that had been tearing through Devourer hulls now scattered harmlessly across adaptive armor. Energy shields designed to stop nuclear explosions were penetrated by weapons that seemed to phase shift their attack frequencies in real time. All Federation vessels, this is Admiral Yuthgara, came the transmission across all frequencies. Enemy adaptation rate exceeds tactical projections. Fleet withdrawal is authorized. Negative, Mills replied, his voice cutting through the chatter. Human ships are moving to assist disabled vessels. We're not leaving anyone behind. What followed would be remembered as one of the most insane tactical decisions in galactic history. Instead of retreating with the rest of the fleet, the human ships moved directly into the combat zone where Devourer forces were systematically destroying the larger alien vessels. Mills ordered his destroyer to ram the nearest Devourer command ship. The impact tore both vessels apart, but not before every escape pod on the human ship launched, loaded not with fleeing crew, but with Marines carrying boarding equipment and improvised weapons. Lieutenant Commander Sally Foster led the zero-gravity assault through the breached hull of the enemy vessel. The Devourers inside had been designed to repel boarders using energy weapons and personal shields. They were completely unprepared for humans wielding crowbars, welding torches, and pure determination. What are they doing? Zexthara demanded from her command ship as she watched the tactical display. Those humans are using maintenance tools as weapons. They're doing what humans do, Thompson replied from his position on the Federation flagship. They're improvising. The sight of human Marines literally tearing apart Devourer units with improvised tools while sustaining horrific casualties sent shockwaves through both fleets. The machine's adaptive algorithms had been programmed to counter advanced military technology, not beings who would use a plasma torch as a sword or rip armored plating apart with their bare hands. General Nancy Brooks coordinated the overall human battle strategy from her command cruiser. While the alien ships retreated to repair battle damage, human vessels moved between them like mobile repair platforms. Human engineering crews worked in vacuum to keep damaged Veltar dreadnoughts, fighting long past their normal operational limits. This is inefficient, protested Admiral Yuthgara as human technicians welded makeshift armor plating onto his flagship's hull. These repairs will not restore the vessel to full combat capability. They don't need to, Brooks replied. They just need to keep you shooting until we win or die trying. The tide of battle turned when the humans began using their ship's repair facilities as weapons. Captain Susan Blake ordered her engineering vessel to dock with a crippled Devourer cruiser and began systematically rebuilding its internal systems. Not to restore function, but to create massive structural instabilities. When the modified ship exploded, it took out 3 more Devourer vessels in the chain reaction. The mechanical fleet found itself facing an enemy that would literally rebuild their own captured ships into improvised bombs. Major Paul Anderson's joint human-alien strike teams proved devastatingly effective against Devourer boarding parties. The machines expected rational tactical responses from their opponents. Instead, they faced Veltar warriors who had learned to fight like humans, using damaged weapons, improvised tactics, and accepting losses that would have sent any logical force into retreat. The battle lasted 18 hours. When it ended, nearly Half the human fleet was destroyed or crippled beyond repair. But the Devourer force was in full retreat, their adaptive systems overwhelmed by tactics that seemed to operate outside any logical military framework. Vex Kaler's damaged cruiser limped alongside the human repair ship that had kept it fighting. Through the entire engagement, the Veltar commander activated his communication system with something approaching reverence in his translated voice. "Colonel Thompson," he transmitted, "I formally request permission for Veltar forces to train alongside human military units. We wish to learn these irregular warfare techniques." Similar requests came in from every surviving alien commander. The species that had once mocked human primitiveness now wanted to learn how to fight like humans, irrationally, creatively, and with a complete disregard for what conventional wisdom said was possible. Thompson looked at the casualty reports and felt the familiar weight of command decisions. Hundreds of human soldiers had died at Syrian 7, but their sacrifice had saved thousands of alien lives and proven that the Devourers could be beaten. "Permission granted," he replied, "but understand that fighting like humans means accepting. That victory sometimes costs everything you have to give." As the combined fleet regrouped and tended to their wounded, word of the battle spread across the galaxy. The humans hadn't just won a tactical victory, they had fundamentally changed how every species thought about warfare itself. The liberation of the Centauri sector came at a price that made even hardened Federation commanders question whether victory was worth the cost. Colonel Chris Martinez stood in the observation deck of New Geneva Station and watched the latest. Casualty reports scroll across the display screens. 43% losses in the 3rd Marine Division, 38% in the 5th Engineering Corps, and 51% in the volunteer assault companies, not by any rational military standard. These numbers represented catastrophic failure. By human standards, they represented another successful mission. "I don't understand how your species maintains morale with such devastating attrition rates," Admiral Youthgara said as he floated beside Martinez in his environmental suit. The Etherian commander had been studying human military psychology since Zarian 7, trying to comprehend how soldiers could function effectively while watching half their comrades die around them. Martinez watched a medical transport dock with the station, carrying wounded Marines from the battle for Kepler Station. "Because we understand that the alternative is worse. Every human who dies here means other humans somewhere else get to live. That's not complicated math. The Centauri liberation had begun 3 weeks earlier when long-range scouts detected a massive Devourer construction project in the heart of the sector. Intelligence analysis suggested the machines were building something called a cascade generator, a device that could accelerate their adaptation process exponentially and share upgrades across their entire network in real time, if they complete. That thing, Dr. Amanda Wright had warned during the pre-mission briefing, every Devourer unit in the galaxy will instantly benefit from every adaptation any other unit has ever developed. They'll become impossible to defeat through conventional means. The Federation High Command had been paralyzed by the implications. Attacking the construction site would require fighting through the heaviest Devourer concentrations ever encountered. With casualty projections that exceeded acceptable limits for every species except one. Humans will lead the assault, General Patricia Wells had announced during the War Council. All other species will provide support and evacuation assistance. We'll punch a hole through their defenses and hold it long enough for specialized teams to destroy the generator. The alien commanders had protested immediately. The projected human losses exceed 70%. Zexthara had clicked in distress. No military force can sustain such casualties and remain effective. Human forces can, Wells had replied simply, because we know how to die for something bigger than ourselves. The assault on New Geneva Station had proven her point. When Devourer forces surrounded the facility and cut off all evacuation routes. Lieutenant Colonel Sandra White's forces had a choice: retreat and abandon the strategic position, or hold the line knowing they probably wouldn't survive. They chose to hold. Captain Danny Foster coordinated the defense from the station's command center while Devourer boarding parties attempted to breach the hull in 17 different locations. His Marines fought in corridors that had lost life support, using emergency oxygen supplies that gave them maybe 20 minutes of combat effectiveness. Sir, Sergeant Amy Rodriguez reported through the communication system, Sections C through G are compromised. We've sealed the blast doors, but the Devourers are cutting through. Estimate 15 minutes before they reach the main reactor. Foster checked his ammunition count and made the decision that would define the entire engagement. All units, fall back to the reactor chamber. We're going to make our stand there. That's suicide, protested Sub-Commander Trixfall, who had been assigned as an observer to the human forces. The reactor chamber has no tactical advantages. You'll be trapped with no escape route. That's the point, Foster replied. Sometimes the best defense is making sure the enemy knows you'd rather destroy everything than let them have it. The final battle lasted 6 hours. Human Marines fought from behind makeshift barricades constructed from furniture, maintenance, equipment, and the bodies of fallen Devourers. When their ammunition ran out, they used maintenance tools. When those broke, they used whatever came to hand. Corporal Jake Peterson held off an entire Devourer assault team using nothing but a fire axe and absolute determination. His final transmission, recorded by the station's emergency systems, would be played at military academies across the galaxy. Tell my mom I kept my promise. I didn't quit. The station held for exactly 6 hours and 14 minutes, long enough for the refugee evacuation fleets to escape the sector and for Admiral Carter's task force to position itself for the final assault on the Cascade Generator. Dr. Amanda Wright, embedded with the refugee fleet, documented the psychological impact on the alien survivors. They can't understand it, she reported to Earth Command. These species have spent millennia perfecting warfare through technology and genetic enhancement. The idea of ordinary beings choosing to die for strategic advantage is completely outside their experience. Major Paul Anderson was leading joint human-alien strike teams that had become the most effective anti-devourer units in the galaxy. The aliens who had once mocked human primitiveness now competed for assignments with human forces, eager to learn the tactical flexibility that made humans so unpredictable. The key, Anderson explained to a group of Veltar officers, is understanding that perfect tactics are predictable tactics. The moment you start doing what the enemy expects, you've already lost. Humans learn to fight other humans who are creative and illogical. That's why we're good at being creative and illogical too. Lieutenant Commander Lisa Adams demonstrated this principle during the assault on Devourer Factory Complex 7, when her combined strike team found themselves facing adaptive defenses that countered every weapon they carried. She ordered her forces to do something that violated every principle of military logic. They attacked without weapons. The Devourers had been programmed to counter energy weapons, kinetic projectiles, chemical explosives, and even improvised tools. They had not been programmed to handle 50 Marines and Veltar warriors, charging directly at them with nothing but their hands and absolute fury. The factory complex fell in 47 minutes, but Adams' strike team suffered 86% casualties. When questioned about the tactical decision, she simply replied, "Sometimes you have to show the enemy that you're crazier than they are." The pattern repeated across dozens of engagements throughout the Centauri sector. Human forces would accept casualties that other species considered unthinkable, accomplish objectives that conventional wisdom declared impossible, and then request immediate redeployment to the next combat zone. Captain Roger Mills, whose ship, had been rebuilt 3 times after ramming attacks, summed up the human approach during a joint command meeting. We're not trying to fight a perfect war. We're trying to fight a war that ends with humans still free. Everything else is negotiable. The alien commanders were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something unprecedented in galactic history. These humans didn't just fight with primitive weapons and tactics. They fought with a completely different understanding of what warfare meant. They don't fight to preserve their military assets. Observed General Kriegsmarks, after watching human forces deliberately sacrifice an entire battalion to destroy a single devourer production facility. They fight to preserve their ideals. They would rather die free than live as slaves. Colonel Martinez felt the weight of that observation as he watched another medical transport arrive at New Geneva Station. The wounded Marines aboard that ship had paid a terrible price for the freedom of beings they had never met on worlds they would never see. But they had paid it willingly, because they understood something that the galaxy was only beginning to learn. Some things were worth any price, even the ultimate one dot as the Centauri liberation neared its conclusion. The casualty reports told a story that chilled alien commanders and inspired human reinforcements in equal measure. Entire human units had been reduced to handfuls of survivors, yet their morale remained unshaken. How do you replace such losses? Zexthara asked during a supply meeting. Your recruitment centers cannot possibly train new soldiers fast enough to maintain unit strength. Wells smiled grimly as she reviewed the latest reinforcement schedules. We don't replace them. We honor them by finishing what they started. Every human who volunteers knows they're probably going to die. They volunteer anyway. The liberation of Centauri would be remembered as the campaign that proved humans could defeat any enemy, no matter how advanced. But it would also be remembered as the campaign that showed the galaxy what victory really cost. General Jake Morrison stood on the observation platform of Nexus Prime's highest spire and watched the sky burn. Devourer ships descended through the atmosphere like metal rain, their adaptive hulls gleaming with the accumulated knowledge of 100 conquered worlds. The same crystal towers where humanity had once been mocked now trembled under the weight of mechanical assault. Sir, Captain Susan Blake reported through the communication system, her voice steady despite the chaos erupting around them. Devourer ground forces have breached the outer perimeter. They're advancing on all fronts with approximately 10,000 units. Their armor appears to be resistant to every weapon the Federation has deployed against them. Morrison nodded grimly as he watched the tactical displays update in real time. The enemy had learned from every previous engagement, adapting their forces to counter every tactic the galaxy had thrown at them. Energy weapons were useless, kinetic. Projectiles barely scratched their armor, and even the improvised human tactics that had worked so well before seemed to have limited effect. They've been studying us, he said to High Chancellor Zexthara, who stood beside him watching her capital. World burn. Every battle, every engagement, they've been learning how humans fight. Now they're ready for us. The insect leader's mandibles clicked in what Morrison had learned to recognize as despair. Then we have already lost. If even human tactics cannot stop them, what hope do we have? Morrison smiled, and there was something in that expression that made the alien leaders step back. They've learned how we fought before, but humans are always learning too. Colonel Rogers, initiate the Terra Doctrine. Below them, the city of Nexus Prime was transforming into something that defied every principle of civilized warfare. Instead of establishing defensive positions around strategic locations, human forces were systematically evacuating entire districts, while simultaneously preparing them for controlled demolition. Captain Danny Foster led civilian evacuation teams through the crystal corridors while his engineers rigged every building with explosive charges. You're going to destroy your own capital? Vex Kaler asked in amazement as he watched human soldiers preparing to level structures that had stood for millennia. "It's not our capital," Foster replied as he helped a group of Etherian refugees into a transport. "It's just a city. Cities can be rebuilt. People can't be replaced." The tactical plan was insane by every conventional standard. Instead of fighting a defensive battle to protect Nexus Prime, human forces were turning the city itself into a weapon. Colonel Mike Rogers coordinated the effort from deep beneath the planet's surface, where human engineers had been working on something that would have been considered impossible by any rational military mind. "The geological surveys are complete," reported Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell from the Underground Command Center. "We've identified 17 major tectonic stress points beneath the city. Controlled detonation at precisely calculated intervals should trigger cascading seismic events across the entire continental plate." Dr. Amanda Wright stared at the tactical projections in horror. "You're talking about artificially triggering earthquakes. The collateral damage would be catastrophic." "Less catastrophic than letting the Devourers consume the entire galaxy," Rogers replied. "Sometimes you have to break something to save it." The Devourer hive mind consciousness arrived on the third day of the siege, a massive construct that dwarfed the largest Federation battleships. It settled into orbit above Nexus Prime like a mechanical moon, its sensors probing every aspect of the planet's defenses. This was the intelligence that had absorbed the knowledge of dozens of conquered worlds, the entity that had learned to counter every form of resistance the galaxy could offer. Morrison watched the alien construct to the observation deck's crystal windows and felt a cold satisfaction. There it is, the brain of the entire Devourer network. It came here personally because it wants to understand how humans fight. We are going to show it. The hive mind began transmitting on all frequencies, its message translated into every known language. "Resistance is illogical. Your tactics have been analyzed and countered. Your weapons are ineffective. Surrender will result in efficient integration into our collective." "Tell it to go to hell," Morrison ordered. What followed was unlike any battle in galactic history. The Devourers advanced into Nexus Prime, expecting to face the same tactical approaches they had encountered on dozens of other worlds. Instead, they found a city that seemed to be actively trying to destroy itself. Human defenders fought from positions that made no tactical sense, holding buildings that were rigged to explode the moment they were overrun. When Devourer forces adapted to the explosive traps, human soldiers simply abandoned entire districts and retreated to new positions deeper in the city. "They're leading us into a trap," the hive mind consciousness calculated as it watched its forces advanced through empty streets lined with abandoned defensive positions. But the tactical advantage of this terrain configuration is unclear. Sergeant Amy Rodriguez and her squad demonstrated the human approach when they were cornered in the city's central plaza. Instead of fighting from cover or attempting to retreat, they ran directly toward the largest concentration of Devourer units while carrying satchel charges that would level the entire area. "This behavior is irrational," the hive mind observed. "They are sacrificing tactical assets without strategic gain." That's when the ground began to shake. The first seismic event was barely noticeable, a slight tremor that most beings attributed to the ongoing combat. But Rogers and his engineering teams had spent months calculating exactly how much force to apply to precisely the right geological pressure points. The second tremor was stronger, causing the crystal spires of Nexus Prime to ring like massive bells. The Devourer forces paused their advance, their sensors trying to analyze this new phenomenon that didn't match any known weapon system not by the third tremor. Even the hive mind consciousness was beginning to experience something it had never felt before: uncertainty. Its perfect adaptive algorithms could counter any weapon, any tactic, any strategy that followed logical military principles. But what the humans were doing violated the very concept of logical warfare. They're using the planet itself as a weapon, The entity calculated with something approaching disbelief. They are willing to destroy their own refuge rather than surrender it. The fourth tremor cracked the foundations of the oldest buildings in the city. The fifth sent the Devourer Consciousness's own ship tumbling in orbit as seismic waves propagated through the planet's crust. By the sixth tremor, massive fissures were opening in the streets, swallowing Devourer ground forces by the hundreds. Captain Lisa Bennett transmitted the final evacuation order as buildings began collapsing around her. All Federation personnel to emergency transports. Repeat, immediate evacuation of all non-essential personnel. The city is coming down. The Devourer hive mind tried desperately to adapt to this new form of warfare, but its algorithms simply could not process beings who would rather destroy everything than lose it. Every tactical model it had developed assumed that intelligent species would want to preserve their resources and infrastructure. Adaptation impossible, it transmitted. In panic, enemy tactics violate fundamental principles of self-preservation. This behavior cannot be predicted or countered. Morrison stood in the collapsing command center and felt the ground heave beneath his feet as centuries of accumulated tectonic stress released in a controlled geological catastrophe. The crystal spires of Nexus Prime fell like trees in a storm, their collapse sending shock waves through the planet's crust that would be felt on the other side of the world. When the shaking finally stopped, 3/4 of Nexus Prime lay in ruins. The Devourer ground forces had been buried under millions of tons of rubble, their adaptive armor useless against the simple weight of falling stone. A hive mind consciousness, damaged by the orbital shock waves, fled the system in something that could only be described as terror. Damage report, Morrison requested as rescue teams began pulling survivors from the wreckage. 67% of the city is destroyed, Blake reported. Estimated reconstruction time is 15 to 20 years. Human casualties are approximately 40% of deployed forces. Morrison nodded as he watched the sunrise illuminate the devastated landscape. And the Devourers? Complete tactical withdrawal from the system. Long-range sensors indicate they're retreating beyond the galactic rim. Sir, I think we scared them. High Chancellor Zexthara emerged from the rubble of her throne room, her crystalline exoskeleton cracked but intact. She looked at the ruins of her capital city and then at the human general who had saved it by destroying it. Your species, she said slowly, is completely insane. Morrison smiled. Yes, that's why we win. The new galactic military charter was signed 3 months later in a temporary facility built from the wreckage of the old council chamber. The document, written in dozens of alien languages, established humanity not just as equals in the Federation military alliance, but as primary strategic advisors for all future conflicts. The final clause, insisted upon by every surviving alien leader, read simply, "In warfare, as in survival, there is no substitute for the human spirit."